Chapter 559 to 560. Has my deterrence already reached such a high level? Yama muttered in wonder, as he didn't expect that the core members of the Akatsuki organization, such as Madara, Zetsu, and Tobi, would retreat in so much panic. Although he felt a bit regretful, there is nothing he can do about it, and sighed. Well, although I failed to kill Nagato again, which is a pity, I at least managed to safeguard the reputation of Yama as the current invincible character in the shinobi world, even if this reputation is just a hollow shell. Don't underestimate the effect of deterrence. It may not seem much on the surface, but sometimes it can play unexpected and miraculous effects. The invincible existence of Yama is something extremely necessary, as it will give Kuroto the necessary buffer time he needs to continue his project Godhood. Because the situation after the war tonight has cleared to the entire shinobi world. The strength of Uzumaki Nagato, the leader of the Akatsuki organization, has far surpassed any Kage-level existence and has really reached the domain of a high-tier Super Kage. Whether it is a Kage, a Jinchuriki, or a Biju, none of them can put any resistance in the face of Nagato. Even if the 5 Kage fights together against Nagato, they cannot even touch Nagato in the strict sense, as they will die at the hands of Limbo clones before they can do so. So, the number of people in the shinobi world, the ones currently alive, who can actually threaten Nagato is already 0 if the existence of Obito's bug-level Kamui is not counted. So, it wouldn't be wrong to say that the shinobi world has officially entered the same era as that of the previous god of shinobi, with Nagato being Uchiha Madara-level existence. In such a situation, if there is no deterrence of an invincible existence present in the shinobi world who is keeping Nagato in check, Nagato and the Akatsuki organization would have no scruples at all, and mow down the 5 great shinobi villages single-handedly with no one capable enough of stopping them. When this happens, the 5 great shinobi villages will either be forced to surrender their Biju for the sake of survival, or the 4th great shinobi war will start much earlier than it should. And even then, it is highly unlikely that the shinobi alliance would win. Maybe it will take a few months at best and the Jubi will be revived. But Kuroto's project Godhood would obviously not be completed in such a short period of time. At that time, Kuroto will either have to face the Jubi Jinchuriki Nagato, who wants to create peace with fear, or the ancestor of chakra, Otsutsuki Kaguya, who would have been freed of her seal and descended upon the shinobi world and wants to hang all the creatures of this shinobi world on the divine tree to absorb their chakra and turn them into Zetsu beings. If it is the former, that is Nagato, then there would still be room for maneuver, as Kuroto could hide in dark and continue his project Godhood in extreme secrecy. But if it's the latter, that is Kaguya, then there is nothing Kuroto will be able to do, and perhaps he too will become nutrition of the divine tree after being hung to it under the effects of the infinite Tsukuyomi. In such a situation, the existence of Yama is very important and meaningful, as Yama has basically become the Senju Hashirama of this era, the only person capable of fighting against and suppressing Nagato, the Uchiha Madara of this era. Even if Kuroto is no longer on the same level as Nagato and cannot defeat him if he is not in a resonant state with the giant Tenseigan on the moon, this deterrent effect and feat brought by the mere existence of Yama will keep Nagato in check. After all, Nagato isn't actually the Uchiha Madara. With a relieved sigh, Yama looked at the moon in the night sky with a thoughtful expression and muttered to himself, "It does seem that I can no longer rely on the chakra of the giant Tenseigan on the moon, because the actions of the radicals on the moon are too crazy. They don't seem to care about the consequences that their reckless actions can cause to the shinobi world. The act of sending a meteorite to the battlefield is a clear declaration and a warning. If Yama were to casually borrow chakra from the giant Tenseigan on the moon again, the next thing falling on the earth will not just be a meteorite." As Yama was thinking, the faint orange light appeared on the horizon. and as if cutting through the dark and dreary night, it illuminated the world again with a warm embrace. "It's finally dawn," muttered Yama as he cast his gaze at the rising sun. With the emergence of the morning light of the rising sun, the difficult night had finally passed away. Although the pain this night brought to the people of Konoha can't be forgotten so easily, it would still ease up their nerves to some extent. When Yama thought as such, he couldn't help but laugh at himself. It's ironic that the Konoha village and the shinobi world need dawn from the Akatsuki. Not getting too much into it, Yama soon retracted his gaze from the rising sun and looked at the surroundings. The damage done to the battlefield is enormous, and the picture of several miles has completely changed. There is no longer any shadow of the valley as there was before. The center of the battlefield is a 100 meters deep crater with big chunks of hot and melting rocks at the center of it, and all around is just plain and simple destruction. Several villages and towns far away also seem to have been affected, muttered Yama with a sigh. Such is the power of a meteorite. After confirming that nothing was left for him to do on the battlefield, Yama weaved several hand signs and then disappeared into a cloud of smoke. On the other side, the emerald green Susanoo appeared out of the mounds of dust and smoke. Cough, cough! Coming out of the mud and rocks that buried him, Shisui coughed heavily, and Fuwa, who was sitting on Shisui's shoulder, shook her whole body to clean off the dust from her fur and cursed in anger, "Damn it! Now I will have to take a bath to clean off all this dirt." Shisui remained silent and didn't give any reply as he looked around to see if he could figure out the situation. Following Shisui, Itachi disguised as Homusubi also came out and coughed heavily while looking around at the scene of destruction. Although Shisui and Homusubi had tried their best to get as far away from the battlefield as possible, the offshoot and the after effects of the meteorite's collision with the Earth's surface still affected them, and they had no other choice left but to use all their chakra reserves into using Susanoo in order to prevent their death because of being buried in the ground. Fortunately, the Shisui's Susanoo, enhanced by the Senjutsu chakra, was much stronger than his normal Susanoo, and with Homusubi adding his Yata mirror to the Susanoo, the defense only got stronger, which allowed Shisui and Homusubi to withstand all that damage, and they didn't suffer any serious injury. Although the two are safe themselves, the two are still quite worried about the others. But in their immediate vicinity, there were no signs of any presence. Neither of the members of the Akatsuki organization, nor of Yama, or of the shinobi of the 5 great shinobi villages. This made them more worried, especially in regard to Yama's safety. The previous appearance of the meteorite was so strange that both of them had to suspect that it was the work of the members of the Akatsuki organization. So their worries related to the safety of Yama only grew stronger. After a while of observing and finding nothing, Shisui muttered, "It seems that the battle is over. The members of the Akatsuki organization should have retreated. I just hope Yama is safe." Homusubi nodded silently. Shisui then glanced at the unconscious Yagura and Killer Bee and said to Homusubi, "Leave the 2 of them to me. I will find Hokage-sama and the others. You go back to the village to confirm Yama's situation and also the situation of the clan and the village." After listening to Shisui's instructions, Homusubi thought a little and nodded. "All right, please make sure that Hokage-sama is safe." Homusubi is already very worried about the safety of his family, and he also understands that Homusubi of Amatsukami shouldn't stay on the battlefield for very long, as Yama and the members of the Akatsuki organization have already retreated. So without wasting any more time, his body divided into hundreds of crows and dispersed into the sky. With Homusubi gone, Shisui, with the help of Fuwa, started to search for the shinobi of the 5 great nations. At the same time, the shinobi of the 5 great shinobi villages that were affected by the after effects of the meteorite collision also crawled out of the ground. "Everyone okay?" Sandaime Hokage questioned while releasing his hands from the adamantine staff and releasing the ninjutsu. "Hokage-sama, Although injured, the ones on our side are all alive. The same is the case on our side, Hokage-sama. The two of us are also fine, sensei. In response to the question of Sandaime Hokage, the surviving shinobi responded one after another. Because they were already several miles away from the main battlefield and had further retreated upon discovering the falling meteorite, so although they only suffered the aftershocks and were buried underneath the ground, and since Sandaime Hokage and Sandaime Tsuchikage had already anticipated this situation too, so the moment they were about to be buried, they were protected by the earth-style defensive jutsu used by the two Kage that withstood most of the shock. As a result, some only had their arms bent in an unnatural direction, and others only had their legs broken, but overall most of them seemed to have survived under their joint efforts. All those who can move and walk on their own help the others? Upon receiving replies, Sandaime Hokage then gave his next instructions to help out each other and started to look around the battlefield. At this time, the morning light shone from the horizon and spread the warmth of the morning of the next day. Looking at the unrecognizable surroundings that can no longer be called the result of a battle between shinobi, Sandaime Hokage sighed and felt as if he had aged more than a decade in just one night. After easily avoiding all the obstacles, Kuroto quietly returned to the village. With the soft morning light falling on his back, Kuroto stood on the remains of the outer wall of the village and looked at the scenery of Konoha that has experienced and survived one of the toughest nights since the establishment. At this time, of the Konoha village, only the outer walls, and a few blocks close to the outer walls that were protected well, are left intact. Everything else is completely destroyed. The closer to the center of the village, the more serious the misery, and the more serious the signs of destruction. Not to mention the very center of the village, where the Hokage building generally stands, has become nothing more than a deep pit with only dust and rocks. Given the state of the village, it wouldn't be wrong to say that more than 95% of the Konoha has been destroyed in the overnight attack, including Kuroto's home, which is also part of that 95%. However, be that as it may, Konoha was not at all desolate at this moment. On the contrary, the destroyed village was filled with tens of thousands of people, lined up in neat rows, following the standard procedure and partaking in or assisting in the follow-up procedure with everything, be that recording and getting the dead ones buried, getting their injuries healed, summarizing the events from their own perspective, or receiving the food. Unlike the Pain's assault on Konoha that took place in the canon, where the Six Paths of Pain launched a sudden attack on the village while Konoha's defenses were down, and the villagers did not have enough time to retreat to the refugee shelter before the Super Shinra Tensei was used, which resulted in the immediate death of several thousand Konoha villagers, as well as the injury of more than a few 10,000. The Konoha this time around had been prepared for the raid of the Akatsuki organization. When Satori invaded the village entered a state of emergency, and the shinobi in Konoha were ordered to help with the evacuation of the citizens to the refugee shelters. So by the time Tendo used his Super Shinra Tensei in an attempt to completely destroy Konoha, most of the villagers were safely moved to the evacuation shelter, and most of the Konoha shinobi had gathered far away from the center of the attack. Therefore, the number of casualties is not as serious as imagined initially, especially because the injured ones were given timely medical treatment by Tsunade Heim's slugs. Of course, the number of casualties is not as serious, as imagined does imply that the number still exists, so although everyone is orderly following the procedure, a solemn and heavy atmosphere still lingers in the village. Not delving into the matter too deeply, Kuroto quietly sneaked into the village, and after replacing the shadow clone left in the village, he made his way towards the temporary medical camp in order to find Yui. Kuroto didn't have to search too arduously and easily located Yui, only to find that, despite the severe chakra exhaustion due to the several battles, and more specifically because of the unconscious use of Shinra Tensei on one of the pains, she was still gritting her teeth and using everything she could to heal the injured shinobi and the villagers. Kuroto could see that her legs had already started to soften, and she might collapse at this rate, but she doesn't seem to have any intention of stopping the treatment. Seeing her in such a condition, Kuroto sighed slightly and slowly transferred his chakra into her, making it possible for her to continue the treatment of the injured people without self-harming. In the midst of healing a piercing wound of a Konoha shinobi, Yui was surprised to find warmth in her body, but upon noticing Kuroto looking at her with a smile, she understood that it must have been done by Kuroto. Yui couldn't figure out how Kuroto was able to give her his chakra, but because chakra transfer technique is not that big of a deal, or rare among the shinobi, she didn't worry too much about it and refocused her attention on the patient lying in front of her and continued to provide treatment to the injured villagers. It was only after several dozens of patients later that the number of seriously injured decreased, and the other people on the staff asked her to take a break to rest. Did she stop? As soon as Yui took a break, Kuroto held her and brought her to a relatively isolated tent and started to inject more chakra into her. After transferring sufficient chakra into her to ease the effects of chakra exhaustion, Kuroto heaved a sigh of relief and said, "It's okay to want to save more people, but to be able to do so, you must also take care of yourself. If you were to collapse at a critical point in the middle of treating someone's injury, it could prove to be fatal and might even result in the death of the patient." "I am sorry." Yui nodded and apologized silently because she knew that Kuroto is right. Seeing her admitting, Kuroto didn't say anything else about that matter and just hugged her tightly and muttered, "I am glad that you are safe. During the entire incident, I was really worried that something might happen to you. Thank goodness you are safe." Yui also hugged Kuroto tightly, for she too had the same worry the entire night. Although she trusts Kuroto's strength and abilities and believed that nothing will happen to him, she still couldn't help but get worried. And her worries were indeed reasonable. After all, the ones who attacked the village yesterday left behind thousands of dead and injured. Even most of the best shinobi of Kuroto's generation were not uninjured either. Therefore, now that she has personally seen Kuroto safe and sound and felt the warmth of being in his arms, her nerves were finally relieved. The two remained silent and stayed in the same position for a few minutes, and after a while, as if Yui suddenly remembered something, she activated her Byakugan to make sure that no one was peeking at them. She lightly whispered, "Kuroto-kun, yesterday when Shizune-chan, Anko-chan, Izumi-chan, and I were fighting against one of the puppets of the leader of Nagato, something strange happened. And my eyes and chakra." Before Yui could finish her words, Kuroto rubbed her hair lightly and nodded. "I know, don't worry about it." A few days ago, Kuroto has sealed a part of his Tenseigan's visual prowess into Yui's Byakugan, with the help of transcription seal in order to protect her. This is also the main reason why Kuroto was too worried about Yui's safety until a while ago. After all, Yui wasn't aware of the visual prowess that was sealed within her eyes. Thus, she could not activate it on her own, and the sealed visual prowess itself was programmed to not activate or help Yui unless she is facing a desperate situation where there is no hope of surviving. So, the fact that the visual prowess sealed within her Byakugan activated must mean that she came to face a desperate situation and had no hope of being able to survive it. In other words, she must have faced a situation where she was just a step away from death yesterday and could have been seriously injured if not dead. This was making Kuroto very worried, and only after ascertaining her complete safety with no signs of serious injury did he feel relieved. Hearing Kuroto's words, Yui finally understood that her guesses were not wrong. The strange thing that happened last night in the refugee shelter was not merely a coincidence, but Kuroto's handiwork. Kuroto-kun, as I thought, it really had something to do with you." Kuroto nodded with a light smile and asked, "Who were other people present with you at that time? And who all witnessed that strange incident?" Yui thought about it for a while, then answered, "In addition to me, Shizune-chan, Anko-chan, Izumi-chan, 4 kids as well as the enemy's puppet were present among the people alive at that time, and they are the ones who witnessed the incident. Although, I don't think any of them will connect the cause of the incident with me, because the lighting in the refugee shelter at the moment that incident occurred was too bright for anyone to be able to discern anything. By the time the lightning returned to normal, that puppet was already defeated. Since the passage was actually dim, and because the incident was too strange, so everyone assumed that it must have been the work of someone else. No one doubted me, because my strength is also not at such a level." Kuroto nodded lightly. "Well, that's good," and thought to himself, "In any case, I will ask Shisui and Itachi to temper with the memory of the witnesses to make sure that the incident is completely disconnected from Yui. Shinra Tensei, Bansho Tenin, etc. are invisible jutsus that are impossible to be detected with normal eyes. In fact, even the likes of Sharingan and Byakugan can't detect them, for they are not direct chakra manipulation, but manipulation of physical forces. As such, there is no way to connect Yui with that incident. But Kuroto still wants to take extra assurance to make sure that no connection remains in order to eliminate all the possibilities that would point at her and ultimately at him through the grapevine. Although doing so will take away Yui's credit for having defeated one of the paths of pain and bring light to her, Kuroto Yui's safety and secrecy on his intelligence are much more important. At this time, Yui asked curiously, "Anyway, Kuroto-kun, what kind of jutsu was that? Is it a newly developed secret jutsu? I couldn't even see it with my Byakugan, if not for my instinctive feeling, and the chakra exhaustion that followed soon after. I wouldn't have even realized that such a jutsu was used." "Well, it can indeed be considered a secret jutsu, if you want to classify it to a type," answered Kuroto after thinking for a while, then said, "There are several requirements to use it. At present, no one in the village except for me fulfill those requirements, so don't mention it to anyone, not even to Tsunade-sama. Don't tell her anything about it, as it is my trump card, not really, in the extreme situation." Yui nodded. "I understand. I was just worried that it might be some kind of forbidden technique." Kuroto shook his head. "Don't worry. It is not a forbidden technique, and has no serious consequences except for serious consumption of chakra, so nothing too much to be worried about." Yui smiled with a relieved sigh. "In that case, I am relieved." In fact, Kuroto didn't need to emphasize the matter of not telling to anyone about it, as Yui already understands it very well. After all, for a shinobi, intelligence is everything, and obviously Yui wouldn't be foolish enough to actively spread such a piece of critical information concerning a very secret jutsu to anyone. In fact, after learning that the incident did have something to do with Kuroto, and further confirming that it was the result of a secret jutsu, Yui didn't even ask anything more about it. Again, for a shinobi, intelligence is everything, and only by knowing nothing can intelligence be kept a secret. After a bit of silence, Kuroto and Yui separated, and Kuroto said, "Yui, regarding the secret technique I had placed on you, it was programmed in such a manner that it will activate if encountered a life-threatening situation and protect you from any and all people and things that you or I deem as a danger towards either of us. Since you encountered a life-threatening situation yesterday night, so it activated and has been in an activated state since then, as a protection mechanism. Now that the situation has passed, I am going to deactivate. Understand?" The method Kuroto used to seal his Tenseigan visual prowess in Yui is the permanent-style transcription seal, so keeping it activated will continuously consume chakra and will be very burdensome for her after all. Yui doesn't have Tenseigan and can't bear the chakra exhaustion caused by the Tenseigan. As such, deactivating the seal while there is no need to keep it activated is extremely important. Yui didn't ask much and nodded slightly. All right? Seeing her acknowledgement, Kuroto weaved a few hand signs, then lightly tapped his index finger and middle finger on her forehead. With that, the Yui's Byakugan glowed in blue light for a moment, then immediately returned to the previous Byakugan. With the seal deactivated, Kuroto asked, "How do you feel?" Feeling the change, Yui took several deep breaths and said while covering her eyes, "I feel that my head and body are suddenly much lighter than a few moments ago. That jutsu, it was quite burdensome." Kuroto nodded and no longer mentioned anything related to Tenseigan. Instead, he focused his attention on the nearby tents. Because the Konoha hospital was destroyed in the aftermath of the battle, these makeshift tents are being used as a temporary hospital and are filled with injured patients. And upon a closer look, one can also see that among the number of injured people, Konoha shinobi accounted for more than 80%, while the rest were villagers. In fact, with just a single glance, Kuroto even spotted several of his acquaintances, such as Kakashi, who is banged like a mummy, Guy, who has several of his bones broken, Asuma, with his right hand plastered, and Anko, who is lying unconscious with a painful expression. Among the others, Kuroto's gaze was, in particular, focused on Anko with a concerned expression. Seeing Kuroto's gaze on Anko, Yui took a deep breath and said with a guilty expression, "Kuroto-kun? Hinata-chan, she was kidnapped right in front of me and I couldn't even do anything." Kuroto put his hand over Yui's head and nodded slightly. "I know. I heard about it. From the memories he got after recovering his shadow clone, he has already learned that Naruto, Sasuke, Neji, and Hinata, these 4 children, have been kidnapped." And now that Yui mentioned it, Kuroto asked, "Can you confirm the specific identities of the people who kidnapped the 4 kids?" Yui bit her lower lip and nodded. "It was Kakuzu of the Akatsuki organization and Orochimaru." "So it really was him?" muttered Kuroto with a thoughtful expression, then thought, "But why kidnap Hinata-chan, and is he again interested in the Byakugan? But does he even have enough spare time to be able to focus on things other than Chimera Jutsu?" Yui continued, "Orochimaru not only took away Hinata-chan, but also took away Uzumaki Naruto, and Kakuzu took away Uchiha Sasuke and Neji-kun." After hearing this further information, Kuroto muttered to himself in realization, Aren't they kidnapping each other's targets?"